A quick note before I start this Friday's video, this one's an old story. And while I was able to locate an archive thread, I was not so lucky in getting a hold of the pics OP dropped in his posts due to 404s. So, sorry in advance to the few references to posted pictures are of low thumbnail quality. But overall it shouldn't affect the viewing experience too much, as most of the pictures OP dropped are images he found as references to his findings. Enjoy!
Hello/X/. I'm visiting from /K/ and would like to tell you a story in regards to some of my recent adventures. There are no skeletons in closets, dinosaurs walking, or trips to Bel Air. I'm not a writer by any means either, so please forgive me if my writing style isn't the greatest. Whether this story is paranormal, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or man-made, I'll leave up to you, as I still cannot decide for myself. You see, I like to fancy myself as a survivalist, or prepper for some of you. I live in NV, about an hour outside of Las Vegas. For certain reasons I'm keeping the exact location secret, and purposely distorting some details. For those of you that don't know, a good 90% of Nevada is government or military-owned land. A lot of it is free to roam though. The only areas that you really shouldn't venture to are well fenced, and clearly marked, for good reasons really. There are many still active, radioactive sites, as well as government testing facilities, bombing ranges, and other things of that nature. They really aren't that exciting, to be quite honest, and usually only have some concrete foundations, or target shacks on them, and are probably hazardous to your health or safety at that. The sites that aren't, are usually fully manned military bases where they cock about with drones. Now, I've never been one to believe in paranormal phenomena. At best, I acknowledge that our government has several high-tech projects they keep veiled, but what I experienced has really made me question these beliefs. I digress, however. Also, just a disclaimer, not all of these pictures are mine, because I didn't bring a camera with me. This story started about a month ago, around on a warm spring night. Yes, it starts warming up early out here. When you were all getting snow, it was hitting about 80 degrees during midday. I had vacation time I had yet to cash in on, and it was nearing the point of expiration. So I took it, not really having any plans, or foresight into what I wanted to do with my 2 weeks off. I did, however, take some of my savings, and cashed in on an IR laser for my rifle and a night vision monocular headset. The first night of my vacation, I felt somewhat restless, so I started up my Minecraft server, and played around for a bit, still feeling unsatisfied. I have always had trouble sitting still, knowing there's nothing to be productive with. My mind goes racing, coming up with hundreds of project ideas. I finally settled on the idea of camping. Unfortunately, most of my friends were busy with the drudgery of work, and no one I knew was willing to get away for the week. It dawned on me that I had never tried camping for a lengthy period of time, alone, for good reason though. The desert is a nasty place to get stranded, and death is a very real possibility, should something go terribly wrong. Between dehydration, broken bones, and rattlesnakes, you definitely have to be careful. The only thing I could really think of to combat this, would be to take along my 5W ham radio, and research the closest repeaters to different choice areas I have. To call for help if things went south, and my Yugo M76 just in case. Damn text limits, but this is a long story, and I promise to post it all. After doing some research and quick side planning, I settled on an area I honestly didn't know very well, but looked promising. It has several abandoned silver mines, washes for shelter, and generally good wildlife to watch or take potshots at. Of course, if anyone from PETA got wind of my ventures, they would have an absolute shitstorm over the number of jackrabbits and coyotes I've laid waste to. So once settling on my location, I begin to pack. This wasn't difficult, as I always keep my bug-out bag ready in my closet, and decided it was a good time to cycle out old inventory. This time was a bit different though. I decided to bring a few more electronics with me than usual, including my ham radio, my night vision monocular, and a solar charger just in case. I decided to leave my cell phone behind, and rely on a good old-fashioned map and compass for navigation. From an early age in Boy Scouts, I've known how to navigate the old-fashioned way, and decided I'd give my rusty skills a bit of a test, and see how well I remembered the UTM coordinate system. The electronics were for some nighttime fun, and emergencies only. I woke up at 3:30 a.m., day 2 of my vacation. I was excited as hell, and ready to head out. I decided to load up on crap before hitting the highway, and stopped and got some coffee and donuts, looking like some ridiculous /K/Amando on a dirt bike. After getting my sweet black nectar, and a load of simple carbs, I headed off. The weather was great, and the wind rushing over my face felt wonderful. As I got a few miles away from the turn-off, I remembered there was an Indian gas station fairly close to the exit as well. The Indian reservation boundaries are an odd shape, and for about a mile, the highway went right through the middle of it, offering anyone who stopped in some tax-free gasoline. I stopped in after topping off my tank, and the cashier asked where I was off to. I told her where I was going, and was just planning to go camping. She mentioned the Air Force base a few miles away had been doing some testing, and warned me not to get lost on their target range. This is definitely something to take seriously, as they do drop live ordnance. I thanked her for the advice, and headed out. It was early morning, and I continued to enjoy the feeling of wind on my face, and the liberating feeling of being able to break free of any social obligations. I reached the turn-off area, where it was all dirt/gravel from there on. I performed a quick test on my ham radio, set the repeater offset, and verified the reception was clear. The dial tone registered, and I got a familiar weather forecast for the day. I was ready to begin. I headed down the dirt trail, and soldiered on through the bumps and washes. My bike frantically kicked up dust and rocks, until I finally reached a couple fork points in the trail. At this point, I couldn't quite remember which direction I was supposed to go, as I had only been in the area once before with a friend and he drove. I looked at my map, and got what I believed to be a good bearing, and headed off down the trail. Now, when I say trail, these are more like gravel roads that sometimes end, or bring you to a military base encampment, or some of the other small encampments around the state, or wildlife preserves, or even BLM land and campsites. Accidentally venturing to a military one isn't a huge deal, they'll usually just turn you around or wave you off. So I wasn't too horribly concerned about a run-in with anything unless you're up near Groom Lake, but that's a different beast. After driving down this particular trail for a while, I realized I'm lost. None of the landscape looked familiar. And I had traveled a good 25 miles before reaching anything that looked like a decent campsite. I had packed plenty of water, and food, so I wasn't concerned about finding a spring, or anything edible. I had also remembered the way in which I came, so that wasn't really an issue either. At this point, I just decided it was adventure time, and drove on for a while, until I found a campsite I decided was suitable for a short stay. I ended up settling at the base of a mountain, near a dried-up wash. It was a pretty nice area, and there were quite a few Joshua trees and trenches to set up in, for some decent afternoon shade. It wasn't rainy season at this point, so the threat of a flash flood taking me out wasn't really a concern either. After getting set up, I threw on my camel pack, grabbed my rifle, and filled my flask with a bit of vodka just for fun. I was my own man now, and had to answer to no one. I walked around a bit, heard the familiar sounds of cicada, and headed towards another dry wash bed near the base of the mountain. After walking for a bit, I quickly became bored and took a swig of vodka. Sometimes it can take a bit to just detach from normal life and relax. I decided after my drink, it was time to start setting up targets, and push my Yugo M76 to its limits. After setting up a few targets, I was good to go. I walked back to my campsite, identifying local plant life, and inspecting oddly shaped rocks, not really in any hurry. I stirred up a jackrabbit on the way back, who was less than happy to see my presence in the valley. I shouldered my rifle, to take a pot shot at it, and then noticed something in the corner of the scope. I adjusted the zoom, and got a closer look. It was a freshly killed coyote. I decided to let our little rabbit friend go, and headed towards the seared carcass. The closer I got, the more pungent the air became. The smell of rotting meat was heavy. When I got closer to it, two things struck me as slightly odd. Number one, the pelt wasn't completely removed, but what had been, was fairly clean. There weren't any missing extremities. Coyotes are considered a nuisance, so you can shoot them freely, but usually grabbing the pelt/tail/paw is common. Number two, it didn't look like there had been any entry or exit wounds from a bullet. Being a bit confused, I just wrote it off as a sloppy hunter who had found a coyote dead of natural causes, and was scamming some farmer offering bounties on hides. Sometimes cannibalism happens in coyote packs, but it's not very common. I made it back to camp, started myself a fire, drank down a shot or two more of liquid courage, and settled on taking pot shots at the targets I set up. I tinkered around, adjusted my scope, and tried taking the longest shots I could. I made a few accurate shots out to 700 m, and decided I had pushed my rifle as I could in my slightly buzzed state. Yes, I know guns plus alcohol equals bad. But I wasn't exactly in a crowded area either, nor completely shit-faced. After letting the rifle cool down for a bit, and breaking open one of my mres, I began cleaning it. After several failed attempts at keeping it 100% dust-free, I gave up, and just did a quick field cleaning. It may not have passed the white glove test, but it would damn sure work if I needed it. After a nice 5-star MRE meal, I decided to break out my ham radio and turned it on, seeing if there were any other hams in the area. I scanned the stations, and didn't really come across anything of interest, except for a few rangers reporting their status. I decided I'd do something that you're really not supposed to do, and started scanning the capped channels. For those that don't know, the military operates on Mars capped channels, which have a very high frequency, higher than VHF, so please forgive the reference. You can eavesdrop on them with the right radio modifications, and as long as you don't broadcast, you should be fine. I started scanning these channels, and came across a bit of chatter. They didn't seem to have much to say either, except area status reports. After a bit, I started getting bored listening to them all report on 10 to 100s, and turned off my radio. As dusk was turning to darkness, I sat for a while, just letting myself go into a trance staring at the fire. As I decided another drink was in order, I began to hear a bit of crackling coming from my bag. I grabbed my bag, assuming some critter Hilo monster had decided to make itself a new home, and instead, found my radio turned on slightly. I turned it up a bit, and realized that the sounds I was hearing were short bursts of what sounded like gunfire over the radio. Intrigued, I turned it up, and listened into whatever testing/war games were going on. As I listened into the action, I heard what can only be described as fingernails on a chalkboard, coupled with a blood-curdling scream, and a bit of dying rabbit mixed in. As I reached for the knob to turn the volume down, I heard a pop, and then silence. My radio had gone out or blown a capacitor, and I was now without any form of communication. I sat there in silence for a moment, wondering if coming out here wasn't the best idea. After thinking about it for a moment, and a bit of self-reassurance that I was just picking up chatter from 100 miles away, I decided that I was just letting small, stupid things like the coyote carcass, and the radio chatter get to me. For all I knew, it was just some war game being played, and new equipment being tested. I decided it was time to get some sleep, and I'd do a bit more exploring in the morning. I took one more swig, and crawled into my tent for a bit of sleep. As I awoke the next morning, and crawled out of my tent, I felt like death. My back ached, and I was incredibly groggy and slow-moving. I restarted the fire, filled up my mess kit pot with water, and started boiling it while pulling out some instant coffee. I decided that today I was going to do a bit of riding around and exploring. I looked at my radio lying next to my tent, and thought, guess I better be careful. After a morning coffee, and MRE eggs and bacon, I grabbed my rifle and headed out to see if I could see any signs of life or find any old abandoned equipment or buildings. I biked up a natural trail, and came over a ridge, to a large stretch of open valley and land. Off in the distance, I could see the beginning of a military base's fence. When I saw this, I felt an incredible sinking feeling in my chest. Whatever was going on last night may very well have been happening just a few miles off. I shook off the feeling, and decided that I was just letting anxiety and my imagination get to me. I just told myself again that it was only war games, and that some noise was probably getting through the channels. I decided to just avoid the area, and rode back towards the campsite over the lower mountain ridge. As I had turned back, I noticed something off in the distance, on the side of the mountain face. It was what looked like an abandoned silver mine, or a natural cave of sorts. At this point, my curiosity got the better of me, and I shook off all fear I may have once had. Now I could actually do a bit of exploration. I rode up to the side, dismounted, grabbed my night vision and rifle, and peeked in. I couldn't tell how deep it was, but it seemed more man-made than anything. The rocks looked roughly carved, but I'm not a geologist either. I couldn't really smell or hear anything, so I decided to walk in a bit further. I put on my night vision, and waited for my eyes to adjust from bright desert sun to darkness. After a second my eyes adjusted, and I turned on my monocular. There wasn't much to be seen. I walked for a ways, but still no signs of anything that would excite anyone other than a geologist. I could see what looked like a turn a bit further back and decided against going too far in, since I wasn't experienced in spelunking. Quote post 123326664. That was me, forgot my trip. Quote post 123326642. This was supposed to have this image. Now we're all up to speed. That's when something hit me. There is a primal fear everyone has, people debate what it is, or how we acquired it as a species, but it's there. It's a deep feeling of dread, like you are being watched or stalked by something horrific. Chills crawl up your body, and you feel that something just isn't right. Well, I felt this, and immediately froze, rifle in hand, pointing down into the cave. I couldn't hear anything, nor could I see anything. I then, however, quickly realized what was wrong. The smell. It was the same pungent smell the coyote carcass was letting off. It seemed too rotten, too pungent, and too strong for just a coyote carcass. Even in the sun, it just seemed odd, but now I could smell it in the cave. This set off every alarm in my mind, and every ounce of fear in me told me to GTFO of there. I slowly backed out, while shouldering my rifle, pointing it towards the back of the cave. Every rock under my boot sounded 100 times louder, and every breath I took felt like it echoed through the entire cave. As I reached the entrance, I just turned and bolted for my bike. I started up, and rode back as quickly as possible. I was taking no chances now, and decided it was probably best to leave. Dusk started setting in as I was riding back, and I was contemplating just moving to a new site, or calling the trip off 2 days in. I still wasn't sure if any of this meant anything, or if I had just been overreacting, but I knew that some odd things had been happening. As I rode closer to my campsite, I noticed everything seemed off. As though nothing was how I left it. I was feeling really uneasy now, but wasn't about to leave my expensive equipment behind. As I got closer, I realized why everything seemed off. My campsite had been raided. My tent was torn, my mess kit was strewn about, the fire pit had been scattered, and my pack had been dumped out. I assessed the damage and realized something: nothing was missing, just vandalized. Even my radio, solar charger, and extra ammo remained. Stuff I was sure would be missing. My decision was made, I was calling it quits. I started packing up my bag, and whatever I could scavenge that hadn't been ripped up. This was about the time I noticed something else. There were no sounds at all. No cicada, no crickets, no birds, just complete and deafening silence. As I was packing, I quickly drained my flask to calm my nerves. Nothing at this point could have changed my mind about leaving. It was quickly becoming dark, and even with night vision and a rifle, whatever was out here was obviously screwing with me now. It was obvious this territory belonged to someone or something else, and my hunting trip turned tables on me. As it got darker, I decided to scan the area first, to make sure my surroundings were clear. As I looked around, I couldn't see much other than the familiar desert landscape. As I began to scan the area near the peak of the mountain, I saw something move. It was just visible behind a rocky area. I tried to make out the shape, but it was distorted and hidden by some larger rocks. I stared in that direction for what seemed like hours. Then, it stood up. To this day, I will not forget the sheer terror and fear I felt while looking at this thing. It's as though death and evil itself was staring right at me, and every part of my mind screamed, this cannot be real. This bipedal creature stood as though it was human, but the eyes were massive. Just massive blank, dark spots in my night vision. No reflection or gleam came from them. I couldn't distinguish any real features other than what seemed like a scaly texture. It just stood, and looked in my direction, as though it knew I was watching it. Then it did something that nearly made me piss myself. It smiled. It was not a normal smile, it was a terrible, jagged tooth, Joker grin smile. I took the safety off my rifle, and shined the IR laser at it. After a brief pause, I delivered a fatal 8mm round to its head. Or so I thought. The shriek that followed was deafening, blood-curdling, and absolutely terrible to hear. It was a scream that went straight into your should, and shattered it to bits. The dying screams of someone getting their head sawn off with a rusty Taliban blade would have been comforting at this point. I watched this thing shake, and shudder for a moment, and quickly delivered another round in its direction. I think I hit center mass, but couldn't be sure. It ran, at a pace I'm not even sure my bike could keep up with, down the ridge. Not quite in my direction, but too close for comfort. I bolted down into the wash, and kept my gun trained in its direction as best I could while running. I ducked into a small crevice, and waited. I could hear grunts and screeches in the distance. At first they seemed to move closer, and then further away. It was difficult to tell where the noises were coming from, but in the pitch blackness, I sure as shit wasn't going anywhere with that thing around. I stayed up all night, crouched in a crevice in the side of the wash, just waiting. Gun trained at the opening, and kept awake only by adrenaline. It was the most exhausting and terrifying night of my life. Dawn broke, and I hadn't heard any signs of the thing. It had been a good few hours since I took the first shot, but I waited until the daylight was strong to even think about moving from my spot. As the sun rose, and the familiar sounds of wildlife returned, I felt safe enough to venture from my spot. Very carefully, I crept out, covered in dust and feeling incredibly drained. I emerged. I looked around to see if anything was around. There were no signs of whatever the hell was hunting me last night, so I decided to man up and head to my bike. I didn't even think to grab my equipment. I just slung my rifle on my shoulder, and very reluctantly started the bike, fearing whatever came last night would hear me. After running it for about a minute, and no signs of movement were seen, I decided to carefully start heading out. Before that though, I had a thought. I wondered what may have been left behind where I scored a hit on the thing. I decided to check it out, since everything seemed clear. I drove up the ridge in DEFCON 1, scanned the area, just to make sure it wasn't watching or following me. I got up to the rocky area where I first saw it hiding at, and found a nice bit of blood splatter. I quickly grabbed a handful of earth and dried blood, and then booked it the hell out of the area. As I was driving down the trail, I started feeling as though I was being watched again. I only drove faster, and didn't look back. After I got home, out about $500 worth of gear, keeping only my rifle, a couple magazines worth of ammo, and my night vision goggles, I decided to get to the bottom of this. I called up a friend of mine who works for the local university, and told her the situation. I didn't exactly go into detail, but I explained that I had been hunting, and shot something I wasn't sure of, that had attacked me. She had me bring her the blood-stained rocks, and I guess ran some DNA tests on them. She got back to me after about a month, and basically told me I don't know what the hell this DNA is, and explained to me that it only partially matched a few animals. Here's where everything gets really weird. I got a call from, well, I don't really know who, to be honest. They referenced my camping, and said it was best I just forget about it. I've also noticed a few people tailing me while driving, and leapfrogging me on a regular basis, trading off following shifts. That's it really. I'm not sure where else to go from here. I'm sorry I can't really bring much closure, but now you know as much as I do.
You prob stumbled on something classified that they're trying to keep wraps on, do damage control. The only significant move you did was the blood samples to the lab. They're observing you to see if you have anything more substantial that could threaten leak the project. Since you don't, you're probably safe. Otherwise you will get detained. The foreseeable course of action they would prob do right now is 1. Confiscate the sample from your friend. 2. Discredit the findings somehow, OFIC. Change them to contaminated samples, etc. 3. Discredit your friend or her lab if it were more serious, remove her licensing. Some BS excuse violation. 4. Discredit you somehow. But that's only if you really had something, which thankfully you don't. If I were you, I'd get rid of or turn over whatever blood, rocks or whatever, etc. you have left. Wash your hands of everything. Treat it as if you stumbled into something as equally classified dangerous to know but more mundane. Like some illegal government operation, it torturing people. Just distance yourself as much as possible. And keep your mouth shut. Right now they're just keeping tabs on you to see what you're going to do next, if anything. If they're satisfied you're not a security threat, they'll just leave you alone and forget about you.
Gave her all of the rocks I had, and pretty much left it at that. Don't even want to know at this point, because I'm not even sure if I was on government land when this happened. I'm sure they found out who I was through her, but I've never told the actual story of how I obtained them or where exactly I was.
Chances are they don't even know that you saw the thing, since you only had the rocks. To them, you could have just stumbled upon some blood-stained rocks and as a paranoid fag asked your friend to inspect them. If they question you one day, don't tell them you saw it. I've heard of the government killing people once they found out they saw something they weren't meant to.
Yup. Definitely in the plans. Although I did tell my friends something attacked me, I didn't know what it was. I did cover and say it looked like a mountain lion, so she didn't think I was insane. I'll just stick with I thought it was a mountain lion.
Could you ask your friend for any of the PCR, the method she probably used, data?
Sure. No idea what that is, but I can ask her.
So, did it have clothes or what?
No, no clothing, but no real definition on its body either. At least no gender distinction I couldn't make out or any real anatomical features.
Be badass super top secret government chimera. Be stuck in testing facility in the desert. Food sucks, I'm out. Sneak out of containment area. Oh shit, Gord spotted me.mp3. Use superhumanimal strength to destroy pleb military that created me. Absolute massacre, Hitler's got nothing on me. I escape. Freedom. Feelsgoodman.png. Sun is too bright, find a cave to hide in, it's mine whilst .3 ds. Getting hungry, nothing to eat in this shitty cave. Find coyotes, eat them, not that delicious but will do. Bring the leftovers home. Minding my own business in the cave. Some asshole pokes his head in, is 3 spooky 5 him. Turns and runs like an African American at a White Hood rally. MFW when this guy is a bigger pleb than the military that spawned me. Go fuck up his camp for lulz. Idiot comes back to his camp, then sticks around once he gets back, for real. Rah. Watching him, has not leaving, what harm can he be? Stand up and smile, maybe I will go down there and make a new friend. Boom.avi. What the fuck hit my face, oh god it hurts, why was I made to feel pain?
I really hope you are kidding. Over spring break I was camping with some friends near Alamo, Nevada, in the great open deserts of our state. It was near Pahranagat Lake, if you know the area. Anyway, this was a university-sponsored outing with a bunch of biology faggots. It was supposed to go all spring break but it got cut short, 3 days short, for, well, reasons which are really unclear. The people leading the trip for the university, faculty, were contacted saying that we needed to leave the area immediately. It was not a park ranger. It was not a Fish and Wildlife, it was the FBI. What in the world does the FBI care about being out here in the middle of the desert? I thought it was suspicious, but they said they were in the process of an investigation which concerned the area we were hiking and camping around. Our faculty members have been taking this trip for years and had never heard of anything like it. Here is the kicker. The night before we are supposed to leave, me and a buddy go walking around randomly at night on the service trails. We hunker down and just lay low when we see that there are vans parked along the side. There are the movements of flashlights on the foothills nearby. We lay in the sage and wait for them to return to the vans, not doing recon as much as trying not to be seen. They were carrying AR-15. Into the fucking hills. If you know anything about the area, the wildlife, and law enforcement, which it sounds like you do, you know that something is seriously wrong. The only conclusion we could come to is that there was some sort of manhunt in progress. How recent are these events you describe? We arrived on the Monday of spring break, March 25, and asked to leave by federal agents pursuing an investigation March 28. I cannot help but think that if the events you posted are real, this was somehow related. We were something like only 18 miles outside of Groom. Could you be more specific about the location?
Well, holy crap, I'm amazed this thread has stayed up this long. I feel I owe you guys a bit of an explanation. First off, I did distort some details in this story. Whoever caught the cicada error, that was a good eye. I will be honest, this happened a bit longer ago than I let on. It was actually a summer night, and I had been laying low for a bit, just to make sure I wasn't going to get Gitmo-ed for telling it. This happened last August. For those of you that are wondering, I live in Tonopah, NV. I'm a ham radio operator, and I like to mess around with trunked and encrypted channels. Also, all of my LE and military experience has been in IT stuff, so I wasn't a grunt. Quote post 123442006. I may very well have been near that area as well. Email me at commissar@tormail.org if you want more details. I'd like to hear any details you may have seen. I've seen other weird crap at these sites, but nothing to this extreme.
My ship model that I made using specs found here.
That's actually a lot closer than the pic I posted.
How about this one?
Oh, there we go. That's a lot closer.